Evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along on this Tuesday evening for a meeting of the Climate Emergency Overview and Scrutiny meeting. Good evening, Shahid. We will start off with apologies. So do we have any apologies, Neil?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from David Cornish, Norman Jorgensen and Graham Howe. Alistair Neil and Shahid Yunis are here as substitutes.
Thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest?
David Cornish.
I have a declaration to make as I am on the Barkham Monitoring Board. Minutes of the previous meeting.
It's just that I wasn't at this meeting reporting the silence was myself with you. She's duly noted. My apologies. I know there we go. But when it said other, oh sorry, microphone.
I didn't appreciate that.
I thought I chatted quite loud enough. Yeah. But thank you for that. Yeah, it's just other councillors present. It's got Pauline Hellier-Symes mentioned there as well. But Alistair Neil was also a sub, but he's not there. But he is in the substitute.
There is apparently a problem with all of the attendance. I know Neil has got a correct version of the attendance.
So yes.
So would you like to go through what you think the correct version is now?
So the correct version was attendance: David Cornish, Andy Croy, Norman Jorgensen, Charles Baguettes, Ian Pittock, Catherine Glover, Graham Howe, Pauline Hellier-Symes substitute, and Andrew Mickleborough substitute. So please accept my apologies and we'll get that sorted out.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on the minutes of the last meeting? No comments. Would anyone like to propose accepting those minutes? Somebody who was here at the meeting, Charles. Somebody who was second. You weren't here. You weren't here already. Ian, did I see your hand flicker? Yeah, yes. So that's proposed by Charles and seconded by Ian. Okay. Public question time. I understand we have a Mr. Peter White who is here to ask a question. Hello. Peter, you're on screen. Are you ready to go, Peter?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. We can all hear you. Yes.
Marvelous. Okay, so yes, thank you for to Councillor Kerr. She has responded to me already on this question, so thanks for that. So my question is the climate emergency plan for Woking Borough Council to be net zero in 2030 or carbon neutral?
Thank you very much, Peter, and it's nice to meet you virtually, if not in real life. So just to start by saying the purpose of this committee is not to defend council policy or to defend the emergency action plan. The purpose of this committee is to scrutinise the action plan and in doing so hopefully improve the quality of the plan. The original motion declaring a climate emergency that was passed by council in 2019 did refer several times to carbon neutrality and not to net zero. The introduction to the current version of the action plan, which we're looking at tonight, makes clear the ambition is carbon neutrality. In the current climate emergency action plan, the term net zero with a hyphen is used once, net zero without a hyphen is mentioned 36 times, carbon neutral is mentioned 14 times, and carbon neutrality is mentioned 9 times. There is a danger that the terms are used interchangeably when they should not be, and I'm sure that the officers will now examine the plan to ensure the use of the term net zero in the plan is appropriate to those parts of the plan where it is used. Other papers prepared for the scrutiny committee meetings, because you mentioned scrutiny meetings, are often prepared by subject specialists rather than by climate emergency specialists. So it is possible that in this process an inappropriate mention of net zero has crept in. As with the plan as a whole, it may well be that net zero is appropriate for some areas of the plan, but carbon neutrality is appropriate for other areas. Having said that, I'm sure that officers and the executive member would prefer net zero, but simply recognise that even achieving carbon neutrality by 2030 is not going to happen without a step change in financial and legislative support for local authorities from central government. It's also worth mentioning that the original goal of 2030 was ridiculously ambitious and set for messaging purposes rather than for planning purposes. Thank you for drawing attention to this, and I will draw it to the attention of officers and of the executive member. Do you have a supplementary question?
I do, yes. Shall I go for it now?
Yep.
Okay, I'm sure you'll agree that providing intentionally or unintentionally misleading information reduces the credibility of that information and also the group publishing it. The difference between net zero and carbon neutrality, as an example, is taught to geography students in school. Any student would know that stating net zero for 2030 is unrealistic and unachievable. It should immediately, in their minds, bring doubt upon the plans. There's a housing developer, even in Wokingham Borough, who has used sustainable development as a description of their development in order to sell them, and probably for more money. An EV charger on the front of a house does not make it sustainable, nor the odd bug box scattered about. A house with solar panels is not carbon neutral, let alone net zero or sustainable. A sapling planted now will not capture significant carbon for a good 20 years, if it even survives. It's important that WBC get their message right and that these very message terms are used correctly, especially where others play fast and loose with these terms. Can you explain what controls are in place, what scrutiny is made of policy, documents and newsletters to ensure that they are accurate, that they are not misleading, that they are achievable, and that correct terminology is used to ensure everybody is on the same page with regards to the aims of the Climate Emergency Committee? And if you don't think that it's the job of the Oversight and Scrutiny Committee to do that, who do you think should?
Thank you very much. That's a very, very long question. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a written answer. Just to touch very briefly on your basic point, I think the officers and the executive member I know do appreciate and don't underestimate the challenge of either carbon neutrality or net zero by 2030. That they just don't. And if you realise the report, it's clear in the report. I agree with you about the need for clarity in terms of the terminology. What developers do is not within the control of the council. So if they're going to do misleading marketing, that's developers for you. In terms of the clarity within the council, again, that's what I will have to check with officers. So the responsibility for what is produced, I think, sits with officers. And I guess at the end with the executive members, the responsibility for scrutinising that, for checking on what people are doing, does sit with this committee. But this committee does not in itself produce material for consumption. So can I leave that there and then give you a fuller written answer to deal with your question? Would you be able to send us an email with your full question on it, and we can make sure we address it?
Who do I send that to?
Send it to Democratic Services.
Okay.
I think you've been engaging with Democratic Service previously.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time and for coming this evening.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. On the agenda is and it's pretty much the only item on the agenda, is the Climate Emergency Action Plan. Oh, sorry, my mistake. Sorry. I'm so excited to get a question from a member of the public. I forgot that members may also want to ask questions. Do we have any questions?
None received, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and so the main item on the agenda is the Climate Emergency Action Plan. Now, this is, I say it's the only, it is going to be the bulk of the work this evening. I don't know if Sarah wants to do a very quick introduction, because everyone's had the document pack. We had it 3 or 4 days before we should have had it. So thank you very much to officers for rushing it and getting it done. It was very useful. Just to let people know what we'll do, once Sarah's done her introduction, we'll go through the plan in stages. We'll look at each stage. We won't just have a free-for-all, because otherwise it would be a disaster. Okay.
No, thank you very much, Andy. yeah, I mean, everything is there in the document. Those who've been on this committee before, been with the council a while and seen, it looks a little bit different to what we've seen in previous years. And we've really taken it back to what those smart deliverables are, getting it costed, getting that RAG rating in there. It has input from across the whole council. We've got several work streams all inputting into this, and obviously the climate emergency team bring it together. I just wanted to take the opportunity to say a massive thank you. This is, you can see the quality of this. This is a humongous job. It really is, for all involved. And it's been through a lot of processes to get here. Typically what we've done before is we've taken this to July council. Last year we moved it to September, and we're doing the same again. The reason why we've done this is so that anything that comes up today through scrutiny, we have the opportunity to actually make any meaningful changes to it, so that you get that proper input. If we were taking it to full council in 2 weeks' time, there just would not be the opportunity to do that, and we figure September is a much better time to do this properly. But no, welcome questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, thinking about the first part of the document in front of us. So, I'm looking at pages 3 to up to current pages 3 to 8, basically.
Can I just clarify? Are you using the page numbers?
I'll check. So I've got two. So I am looking at, in the document pack, it is pages 20 to 20. Pages 20 to 30. So it's all of the headings prior to our 10 priority areas, because these all sort of feel very similar to me. So does anybody have any questions on that first part of the action plan? Charles, what I'll do, make some names. Charles, anybody else? Nope, let's go with Charles then.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, it was more an observation than a question, just based on resident comments, that I note the section under transport about 3 cargo bikes purchased by the council. Yeah, the guy who wrote to me was someone who lived in Woking and was actually very interested in all of this and very supportive of it. And his question was, how did he hire one? How was the council publicising it? And where did he get involved? How did he get involved in this? So it was really just a plea to publicise that a bit more.
No, point taken. I know that because these are for businesses, so the Business Matters newsletter that goes out to, I can't remember how many thousand businesses, it's promoted through that as well as through all our active travel. So there is a lot of promotion, but we can take that as a bit more feedback that it's still not reaching everywhere, and we can look to do more. But thank you.
Anybody else on questions on the first part of the document? Okay, I'll have a go then. So on page 26, there is the very useful current and future emissions tables. And it struck me as a little bit strange because it gives WBC emissions in the first graph as kilotons. But on the graph, it's actually a percentage. And there isn't anywhere where you can see the actual full kilotons per category. I don't know if that was a space-saving thing, but it just struck me that at that point it would be useful to actually have the actual tons, especially if in the title it's going to be described as tons. And the second thing relating to this is, and this comes up in other parts of the document as well, we started in 2020, and does that include, is that not a weird year because of COVID and transport, or have we managed to avoid that weirdness somehow?
So on the first question, I'm just looking at page 26. That's something I'd actually not spotted when going through this with a fine-tooth comb. So yeah, we've got percentages, but then we've said that we're measuring in actual figures. So I think that's one for us to take away for the report. As for the starting date, I'm just looking at the emissions trajectory. It starts in 2019 on that one on the same page. Were you looking at something else? Sorry.
I'm looking at, again, it's the same graph. It says figure 1, Woking and Borough carbon footprint 2020.
And we can pick this up. Andrew, do you want to pick this up or?
Yes, sorry, I was just letting Sarah had a comment. Yes, so 2020 is that's the latest DESNZ. So I'm going to try and say DESNZ. I don't know the exact way of pronouncing it. That's the latest data they have. It's like 3 years in arrears. So that's just the latest percentage we look like to try and show the latest we have. It was obviously we were using 2019 as the baseline, but it's using 2020 as the most recent one.
So does this mean our baseline is going to be moving forward each year?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to keep the baseline of 2019. It's just that's the latest breakdown of the data for people. If the decision is preferred to keep the baseline data, then that'll just be we can go back to the 2019 one and we can discuss that, but then it would just be obviously the same graph every year.
I think the point is the data of our actual carbon footprint, the information we get from DESNZ is 3 years in arrears, and that's what that is. It's not the baseline that you're looking at there.
And does anybody else have any questions on the first part of the plan? Shahid?
Thank you, Chair. Just on that emissions trajectory, well, 2 questions probably got. Just clarification, perhaps, for understanding on my part. This is my first time I'm coming to the committee, so obviously looking at the net zero graph trajectory, it seems that by 2030 we will actually meet our targets. If you look at the graph, the first impression, that's what it gives you. How confident we are that we will actually achieve that target? That's number one. Secondly, obviously these are, and what tools and methods are we using to measure, monitor on a regular basis that we are actually on track, and how we are demonstrating that we are on track?
I'll come in with a high level response, and then I'm sure then officers will want to come in. So what you've got next in this is our way of monitoring that. That is what the CAP is. So that amber line, which is with the CAP. So if we are able to do everything in that we've got the CAP, that's where it will get us to. You'll see in the report that some of those are green status, some are amber, some are red. So at this moment in time, those red and ambers mean we're not quite on track, but we are monitoring that so that we can look at what we need to do to shift those reds and ambers into greens and see what we can do to get there. But that's what this process is about. This CAP, it's this continual process of monitoring. And I don't know if the officers want to go further with that answer.
Yeah, just from my side, I think I agree with that, and the monitoring is, like I say, the DESNZ data as it comes in 3 years in advance. We see that each year, so we can, like I say, keep it updated, whichever way we decided if we use the graph on the left or just incorporate it into the one on the right to show where we are each year on that. Yeah.
Just come back on that one. Just for my understanding, is the data we're looking at, is that 1 year old? How old is that data, the one we're looking at the moment?
So it's 2020, so it's just over 3 years old.
So just to be clear, the data in figure 1 is the actual emissions from DESNZ. Are you talking about the data that's within the CAP, though, in our actions? Was that the question?
Oh, just one of both of them, to be honest.
Okay, so yeah, so the information we get from DESNZ is 3 years in arrears. This is the 4th update report. So this is where we are now, and it's a progress on where we've come over the last year. So it's an annual report, and we produce these each year.
Sorry, just a clarification. Today we are in July now, 2023. So are we saying this is 1 year, last year's data? So it'll be July approximately of 2022 data, which we are looking at the moment.
So the data of our actual emissions in figure 1 is 2020, because that's what we get from DESNZ. Okay. As for what we've got with the actions in the CAP, this is where we are at this moment in time and the progress we've made over the last year.
I just said something. I think Shahid's original question was that we look like we're on target to meet our goal, but that net zero line is actually the trajectory we would have to follow if we wanted to be at net zero by 2030. And it's the middle line which is an estimate of what we might be doing. So there's actually a fairly big gap between what we need to do and what we're currently forecast to do.
So if I can just refer back to figure 1, if we look at the future reports that we're going to get over the next few years, can we have a reference in there to show the improvements or lack of improvement as we go through? So currently it's showing us what it was in 2020. Can we see another graph in there which will also indicate the previous years and the following years? So next year we're going to see 2020 and 2021 figures in there so we can see what improvements have occurred.
It's fine from my end. Office is okay with that?
Yeah.
Ed?
Maybe just my, or maybe this is maybe a naive question. I mean, looking at data which is 3 years old, so, you know, what does it tell us, right?
Apologies.
So the question I'm just going to finish off, right? Is there any way of getting the data which is more up to date, perhaps, rather than 3 years old? Because nowadays, I would have thought with the modern technology, we should be able to get the data which is more up to date. And I'm not saying yesterday, but less than 3 years.
No, I think it's a simple up because we're relying, as Sarah's mentioned, what's the acronym now?
DESNZ, it's the
DESNZ.
Department for Energy
It's
Security
government
and Net
statistics.
Zero.
It's government statistics that rely on.
It's DESNZ, DESNZ.
Are there any other questions on this first part of the report? Sorry, yes, please do, Catherine.
Just on that, figure 2. I think it's the legend that is misleading. The BAU, which, okay, I know what it means, but maybe without any action or something, you know, and then with our plan, and then without any, no, wait a minute, net zero is the target, but maybe, you know, it's just, I can see where the problem came from. It's that legend that's confusing. Doesn't actually say it.
We can take that away.
I think possibly BAU is a very business oriented acronym, isn't it? I know what it means. It's business as usual, but unless you work in a business which uses business as usual, you don't know what it means.
Actually isn't really, you know, it's just without taking any action.
So I think the point is this is maybe a use of internal language and we could use a different terminology there. And the other thing I want to pick up is reviews net zero there based on the public question as well. Spotted that.
So I've got 2 more questions and going back.
I found.
Going back to the public question, could you switch your microphones off, guys, please? Thank you. So going back to that public question, this is another example of where net zero might be the right use, it might be the wrong use, but I think officers probably want to have a check through all of the uses of net zero. And my other question is, I guess it's sort of to do with the equalities and RAG as well. I'm colourblind and I can't see the difference between the amber and the green. Yes. So take your equalities statement and rewrite it. So.
Noted, but I see Sabrina's got her hand up and would like to come in, but I note your point there.
Okay, are there any other? Sorry, Sabrina, go ahead.
That's fine. So thanks for the comments on that graph. So what we'll do is we will expand on the footnote of that graph so it's clear exactly what the legend means. And then in terms of the color coding, we have worked with a professional designer to design the CIAP, and we needed to ensure that it was, well, we worked with a professional designer for multiple reasons. But one of them was to ensure that it was accessible, and that included being accessible to people who have visual impairments. So there would be a different version of the CIAP that would be accessible to those with visual impairments. So the one that you're looking at is not that one because it's in the process of being designed. We don't want to design 2 versions and then having to change 2 versions. So we will be making changes to this version, and then a separate version will be created that will take into account visual impairments, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this first part of the plan? No. Okay, good. So let's look at the
Andy, I'm very sorry. I've just had a message to say that our transport colleagues are only here for a short while, so we may want to prioritise that. and we don't want to get to that and then be gone. Sorry.
It is
It's
a
actually,
very,
sorry, it's the other
Sorry.
way round. They're not
Yeah.
here yet and they'll be with us in
Oh,
about an
sorry.
hour. So if you
Yeah.
want to start with something else, they'll be here later.
Thank you. Misunderstood your message, Rhiannon.
Sorry,
Sorry.
it's okay.
there's never a transport officer around when you want them, and when they do come, they're all going to come at once, aren't they? So I was just going to say, we're going to move now on to the looking at the plan by each priority area. The first priority area is transport. What I suggest we do is park, see what I did there? Park the transport bit and go straight on and look at the second priority area, which is renewable energy generation. Now, the other thing I want to remind members of is that there is the summary page, there is some textual detail, but also in Appendix C or B, Appendix B, there is some more detailed work. So I suggest we consider all three parts of it when we look at renewable energy generation. So does anybody want to ask any questions on renewable energy generation? I've got Ian and I've got Michael and I've got anybody else and I've got Chris. Anybody else for renewable energy? Well, everyone will get a chance. Okay.
Thanks, Andy. Page 61, please. You've said that there's a potential site has been identified for another solar farm. It's probably subject to confidentiality or something at the moment, but any idea when we might hear where the site actually is?
At this moment in time, we are not going to proceed any further spending any money on a feasibility study to decide whether to take that forward until we've got confirmation of the changes in grid connection. So until we're confident of taking that forward, we won't be disclosing that location at this moment in time. But I feel relatively confident the way things are going with grids. Generally, the national picture is changing at pace, and at some point in the future, cross fingers, we'll be able to disclose that. Is there anything you want to add, Ian?
No, very succinct. I'm happy with that.
We hope the national grid thing will be solved and we'll be sort of rolling April-ish time, hopefully. Are we expecting sort of summertime next year that we might be able to say something?
I wouldn't want to put any dates on it at this stage. We are meeting with, obviously, from a Barcombe Solar Farm perspective, we are meeting with, obviously, the district network operator and grid. Things are changing at pace. I wouldn't want to put a date on it. I don't think it's fair at the moment until we've got that certainty.
Thank you. So next I have Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Ian's kind of said everything I wanted to say. You beat me to it, but I just, in view of this, and I kind of probably gather you probably can't answer this, but looking at Sarah particularly, about how the discussions with Scottish and Southern and the National Grid are going on, or have they started, or really what's sort of happening to them? Because obviously that's then can have a come to a start date as well.
Yep, we've already started discussions and we've got the next discussion with them later this month. And we've also been putting in consultation responses as well as changes happening. They know it's going to happen and it's just a case of how they do it. And we've been inputting into that, but we are having direct contact, direct communications with both National Grid and SSE, and at the same time, getting them in the same room. So it is happening and continuing to happen.
Yeah, obviously I look forward to hearing how those discussions go. And yeah, and I assume it's budgeted as well, all this? Budgeted as well, all this work?
When you say budgeted,
what sort of budget have you got for it?
what, for the solar farm?
Yeah.
I can't remember off the top of my head. It's all been through scrutiny. It's all in the MTFP. So I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but
I think it's 27 million.
Something like that.
Okay, you hadn't changed. I just wanted a bit of a.
Oh yeah. It's all in there.
Reminding me of it. So,
just to be clear, we are actually shovel ready with this, and this is the problem with the queuing system, is that ones that don't even have planning permission are ahead, but the shovel ready ones aren't, and it's about changing that. So we're ready to go. It's all there.
So my questions really go around the same sort of item at the moment. So the interest I have is the contracts. Have the contracts already been signed with the developer that's going to deploy the solar farm? Are the council, or is the council financially committed already? Something that could cause us a penalty if we were to back out, if the National Grid weren't to come forward, if we were to find that that delay was to occur and we couldn't start? And has it been considered what the additional cost might be if we had a year's delay before something was to start?
Ian will probably want to come into more detail on this, but we do have a contract in place with Briggs, and we are having regular dialogue with them. They've been very good, actually, and they've obviously halted work for the time being. There is a period in the contract that we can pause for, I believe, but there comes a point where we'll have to make a decision whether to end that contract or go forward. We've decided we're not at that date yet, but those are discussions that may or may not need to happen. I'm going to let Ian come in with hopefully a bit more detail around that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't praise them enough, Briggs, to be honest with you. I think their approach, and they're witnessing this not in isolation to Woking Borough Council and Barkham, but right the way across the UK. We're not unique in having had our proposed project pushed back. That's happened to a lot of projects all over the UK, and Briggs are involved in many of them. At the moment, they've been really empathetic with us. They've only billed for what they've worked on. They are saying that they won't bill for anything else. Obviously, we're not getting a service from them at the moment because there is this temporary hiatus that we're in conversations with Grid at SSEN and trying to push the whole project forward. We should hear back on the direction of travel in relation to that imminently. And then, like Sarah says, there is a point in time where there is a definitive cut-off with Briggs. So if we make the decision not to progress and we cut the contract, and there is a bit of payment around that, but not to the level that it would cause undue concern. And it's nowhere near the figures that have been mentioned earlier. Yeah, I think that's all I can say on that.
Thank you. Two questions. One related to this discussion, which was basically, we've obviously been on hold with the contractor for a little while these issues with the grid have been sorted out. Are we on a fixed price with the contractor during this term? So if we stay on hold for another 2 to 3 months, is it the same price that we actually committed to at the start of the contract, or is it? I mean, been working in the construction industry, I know by this point in my line of work, people will be turning around to say, sorry, the costs have gone up because labour's gone up and inflation and blah, blah, blah.
So we caught the last time we caught up with Briggs, they were committed to everything that they'd said right from the onset of the project, no change.
Thank you. Very good and clear answer. The other question I was going to ask was something which I think was being said speculatively at the time in a discussion I had with a couple of the highways officers, and we were actually discussing the Winnish Park and Ride, and we were discussing possible uses for it, basically the top deck, because it's obviously currently closed. And one of them said, oh, we've been thinking about pulling solar panels on the roof of it. Now, I couldn't quite tell because we were on Zoom if he was joking or not, but I was asking if that was a serious thought.
It's no secret that we want to do additional projects across the borough as part of our aspirations for net zero. There are plans to look at the potential for other solar farms. Like Sarah's pointed out, at the moment that is very much on hold whilst we deal with the issues in relation to grid connection at Barkham, and we want to get that one resolved and underway before we look in seriousness at any others. Part and parcel of that is to look at the potential for park and ride sites. Like the French have stated and are now doing de rigueur on all of their park and ride sites. The plan is to mount solar vehicle charging infrastructure into place, and we're not unique. We will, as and when we can, we will look at the feasibility for that. Yes.
Yeah, just to add further, yes, we've discussed this. We can't progress anything further at the moment while there isn't grid capacity to put anything in. Something to bear in mind from a national picture perspective is there are currently more applications in the pipeline to connect renewable energy infrastructure into the grid than is required to meet all our electricity generation needs, even with the increased electricity that's required with electric vehicles and heating. So there's actually more in the pipeline. Doesn't mean it'll all come through, but to give you an idea of how the national picture's looking.
Can I just ever so quickly, it is important to point out though, Sarah, and I know you're aware of that many of those projects are prospectors that haven't gone through an official planning process, that have just spotted an area of land and have just done a very rough and ready appraisal of what could be done on that potential site. And this is where grid and what's happened with the Wokingham Borough Council stroke 1,200 other projects across the UK are coming into their own now. What they're trying to do is rattle those projects to make sure that those projects are, like ours, shovel ready and ready and raring to go, because they don't want this long-winded approach to grid connection. There you go.
Very briefly, Chair, I was just going to say I know what's been said. I understand the point you made as well. I'm fully supportive of this idea. I think we've got the spaces, why not utilise them?
Totally agree, and feel free to help us lobby for the changes, please, so we can speed up. It'd be great.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on renewable energy generation? Shahid.
Just a point of clarification, Sarah. On page 62, it mentions about suggesting some new buildings. That includes schools as well without solar panels. Does that include academies as well? And are we working with those academies to be included in these projects? Because obviously that space is quite big. We put them collectively, and if we're not using it, why aren't we using them?
We are, and Ian, I'm sure we'll be happy to update on that.
Yeah, so I know the authority look at academies slightly differently. Within the energy team, 99% of all corporate sites buy energy through Wokingham Borough Council energy team, academy or not. So we have a bit of a duty of care to help them in terms of energy reduction, and certainly in terms of our overarching net zero targets. We are appraising all roof lines from a solar PV perspective, and we've got a rolling programme of investment into renewable energy generation going way off into the future. We're widely recognised, certainly within the Thames Valley, as the leader in terms of solar PV capacity on schools.
Just a follow-up question. Actually, when it comes to the funding, actually, who will fund this? If the schools do agree, yes, we want them, who actually is going to fund?
Yeah, so there's two approaches. With our own corporate property, it'll be Wokingham Borough Council, and we'll recognise the energy saving result from that. But where it's a non-WBC owned property, they're all owned, but anyway, if it's an academy, what we will do is we will have a charging infrastructure in place. So the way that we're doing that, and that applies as from the 1st of April of this year, is if we invest our own monies into a solar PV array on the roofline at, I don't know, we'll talk theoreticals if that's okay, £20,000 initial investment. The way that we will recuperate that money is over time as a slight reduction on the overarching energy price. So, for instance, at the moment, our energy pricing on our Crown Commercial Service contract is 25 pence per kilowatt hour, there or thereabouts, for electricity. We'll be charging 17 pence per kilowatt hour for all energy generation from solar PV panels on non-WBC sites, and we will recover that initial expenditure over about 5.5 years. It does rise and fall in profile with the energy price. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Catherine?
On page 45 at the top of the page, 63 at the side, Solar Together scheme is already going? I think it's a question of tents here. It's already been launched.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this I think it launched after we'd submitted this. Yeah, thank you. Oh, good. And anyone who hasn't got solar panels and is able to, please sign up.
Thank you. Any other questions on this part of the plan? I have a couple. So my first one is, again, going back to car parks, and we were talking about us having shovel-ready schemes. Are there any plans afoot to make potential car parking PV sites shovel-ready? Or are we still at the, it would be nice to do in the future, but we're not going to do anything in advance of that?
I wouldn't want to authorise spending money on a feasibility study until we've got the certainty that we've got the grid connection. I think once we've got these reforms, then that is a conversation to have then to discuss that further. But until that has come through for certain, it would be very risky to be spending finances on that at this moment in time. Ian, is there anything further you want to add?
Well, only that we have done, prior to all of this, we've done some real cursory feasibility in-house. That feasibility has been recorrected by us, so it's all in-house, it's unpaid for. And the way that solar car charging infrastructure works is obviously you've got the energy generation from the solar canopies, you've got the potential for EV income, but you also have battery availability. So in terms of how quickly those projects potentially pay back, they pay back very, very, very well. Better, sometimes better than, again, depending on connection costs, and Sarah, you're right to point that out, sometimes better than a straightforward PV farm. But at the moment, quite rightly, we're not doing any additional feasibility on those.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my other questions relate to the numbers, and I'm looking at page 60 and page 31, and I'm looking at them simultaneously. Now, on page 60, at the top, it says 2.1 increase the generation of renewable energy, and the carbon savings are given as 10.34 tonnes. Okay, when I look at page 31, it says 2.1 increase the generation of renewable, blah, 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 and it gives the savings as 12.5 tonnes. So there's a 2,000 difference there, and I can't see why that difference exists. I've looked in the Appendix B, and I can't see an explanation there. And the same is true of 2.2. So 2.2, which is on page, where is it? Thank you. It's on page 62, and also on page 31. On page 62, it's given as 16,078. And on page 31, it's given as 27,000. And again, I don't understand why there's this difference.
Andrew, you're on mute.
Sabrina,
You're on mute.
I was waiting for.
That's okay.
Andrew,
Sorry, it's me.
That's fine.
Sorry.
You want,
that
you
Andrew.
want to
Okay,
step-
fine.
Yes.
That's fine.
Sorry for that. I think we'll go away and double check them, because it should be the same. It's not there's a reason for them to be different. And the ones in the table, I think, are the accurate ones. So yeah, we'll just update that as well and double check all the others to make sure that's not the case anywhere else.
Yeah, thanks for flagging it. Thank you.
And again, when you said on the table, I'm afraid I'm looking at two tables. So could we also
So
check
61 and 62, the detailed ones.
and is it the table page 61, 62 which feeds into the graph that we looked at in the first part? The graph which showed business as usual, net zero, and with the CF.
Yeah, I think that, not the totals. So yeah, again, I'll double check if that's has an impact. And it would be very difficult to be noticeable, I think, but we'll double check them as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my next question is the 2.2 talks about 15,000 properties being expected to uptake this scheme. That's 15,000 properties in 6 years if we start this year. Is that achievable? There's a two-part question, so I'll ask them both together. A, is that doable? And then the second part of the question is, I guess will be an emphasis on vulnerable households, and often in terms of heating, it's older people in older drafty households. How hard are those people to reach and to persuade that they should spend money on their house, or that they should allow somebody else to spend money on their house?
So just to double check, you're referring to action 2.2.
Yes, I am.
So support the generation of renewable energy in the borough to generate the equivalent of approximately 1,550 kilowatt hour per household.
So this is 2.2.2. So 0.4, development of the scheme.
Oh yeah, okay, I see that now. So Ian.
Yeah, I think in terms of the home decarbonisation service, I mean, I'm reasonably confident that whilst we're not fully there yet in terms of the offering for a across the board package of schemes, we do have quite a number of schemes set up and operable. Most, I don't mind admitting, most for the time being do operate around the vulnerable fuel poor categorisation that has government support for grants and initiatives. So schemes that you may well heard of, like the energy company obligation. But what we're doing hand in hand with that, as part and parcel of the home decarbonisation service, is a launch of various other schemes. I'm reasonably confident, you know, it's still identified as amber on 2.2.2. So I'm reasonably confident that we will get there. And actually, to come back, Andy, I think there's a massive appetite amongst the private sector at the moment, including right the way across the spectrum, for people to reduce energy consumption in any ways that they can. My colleague Matthew will tell you he takes phone calls on a very regular basis, not so much during the summer months, of course, because energy generally is off the radar, but certainly come back towards October. And this is why we're skilling up our customer services team, because we are anticipating a deluge of, you know, people inquiring about energy reduction initiatives. And that's why we will have hopefully a myriad of schemes eventually to go with that. And
can I just clarify, when we update the tables on an annual basis, the section of the tables that we update is the current status, the carbon savings, if anything has changed, the time scale and total cost, and the RAG rating. We don't update the milestones. So that refers to 2019 when the CIAP was first developed, or in 2020 when this action was included. So those 15,000 properties will be properties that we have aimed to reach since 2020. So it won't be in the next 6 years. Some of these properties will have already been reached.
And just to add further, I mean, there's all manner of schemes going on, and more will come to fruition. To give an idea of some numbers here, you can look today and see how many people have registered their interest so far for the Solar Together scheme. Now, not all of these will go forward, but to show where we are at this moment in time, 3,931 households in Woking Borough alone have registered their interest. I believe are we still the largest out of all our partners doing this, Sabrina?
Yeah, by far.
So we've done a really good job of promoting it, but there's a real appetite. And I think with the cost of energy and that security thing as well, there is a lot more interest in doing making improvements to people's homes, reducing costs long term.
Thank you. Right. Is any other questions on this part of the plan? No. Can I ask if the transport team is here before we move on to?
Yes. Hello. Sorry, I was late.
Hello, transport team.
It's just me.
Okay, so we've been told you're in a hurry. So let's.
Sorry. I was just running late because I had a school event that I had to attend that ran a bit later than I was expecting. But I'm here for as long as you need me.
No worries. So what we're doing, we're going through the plan and looking at the different sections. So we're going to jump straight to transport. So does anybody have any questions on that part of the plan dealing with transport? So Ian, would you like to go first?
Thanks. Not sure whether it's a question or a clarification. Page 46, please. 1A.3.5 bus stop infrastructure works to support North Arborfield SDL bus strategy. There is no North Arborfield SDL. There is what we sometimes call Arborfield SDL, more commonly known today as Arborfield Green, and is actually in Barkham and part of Finchampstead, not in Arborfield and certainly not in North Arborfield. I wonder if you could just clarify that a bit.
So which one is this again? Sorry.
So page 46.
46, sorry.
Yeah. 1A.3.5.
So I think the wording actually came from the Section 106 agreement. So I'm fairly sure that's right. But yeah, I'm sure that the wording or the name of that has actually changed throughout its development of the project.
Yeah.
But yeah, the plan is to roll out some decent bus stop infrastructure along that route. I think it's been delayed a little bit because the routes have been a bit slow coming forward in terms of the bus strategy itself, just due to COVID and the changes that we've had to make around there.
Sorry, what I'm really asking is, could you change the name of it, please? Because it's not reflective of what is actually called, and it might cause some confusion down the road because some other matters going on.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a problem at all. Or well, I'm assuming that, Sabrina.
Yeah, that would be fine. If the name has changed, there won't be a problem.
Okay.
Thank you. Is that all in? Thank you. Alistair?
Thanks. I think this must come under 1A.4.5, the LC WIP.
Sorry, Alistair, which page is this?
Oh, sorry, 52.
52.
It doesn't. I can't really see anything here to do with infrastructure for cycle parking. I mean, it's interesting that sports fields run by the borough, like Laurel Park and Chalfont Park in Early. I mean, they've got car parks, 63 car park spaces, not a single cycle rack. Chalfont Park's got over 70 car park spaces, not a single cycle rack. And these are places that, where people go to play football, but there's nowhere for the participants to leave their bikes securely. I mean, wouldn't this sort of thing be a quick win, for in terms of encouraging cycling? I mean, shouldn't all borough sports facilities have some sort of cycle parking?
Yes, sounds like a very good idea. We do have £15,000 per year allocated to Sheffield stands, which are basically the hoops that you see on the streets. So £15,000 won't go an awfully long way, and we can potentially increase that, as time goes by. At the moment, we're trying to identify suitable sites. So if you've already got a list in mind, it'd be really good to hear about those. I'll be working with the My Journey team to identify some new sites to continue rolling those out over the next few years.
I mean, is part of the problem that the whole sports field thing doesn't sit in the growth and placing growth? It sits, for some reason, it's under finance. Is it sort of a Cinderella thing about the sports field?
So no, from my point of view, cycle parking, as long as we're allowed to put it on that land, if it's privately owned land, it might be a bit more difficult. But if it's council land, we'll happily put in the cycle stands as long as whoever's in charge of that allows us to.
Okay, thank you, Al. Catherine.
just a question. On page 37, it says EV registration. What exactly does that mean?
I think that refers to the number of electric vehicles registered in the borough. So it'll be the numbers based on the figures we get from DFT.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. It's just more of a sort of general point. I think we all want to encourage the use of electric vehicles, no matter how we can do it. And there's been a lot of mention at various places about charging points and all that kind of thing and infrastructure. But the one thing that does concern me about electric cars, and I'm quite surprised no one's actually mentioned it, is the weight of these vehicles. Now, they are a lot heavier than petrol and diesel vehicles, and the batteries, as far as I understand, are about a third of the weight of the vehicle. So I'm really wondering what work is being done about whether the roads can take this extra weight. And I'm thinking about bridges as well. I've got a very, it's not a very strong bridge in Sonning that obviously links up with Oxfordshire. So I'm kind of a bit concerned about something like that. That's about 250 years old. Can that take the weight of electric vehicles?
Yep. No, that's a fair question. I think in the example of the bridge, I think that one in particular has already got a weight limit on it. So as long as it's not over that weight limit, which I think is quite a lot higher than kind of your normal electric car, that'd be okay. But what we have done with the climate emergency team is a climate adaptation kind of risk register exercise. And I'm fairly sure the weight of electric vehicles came up in that, and it's because what we're probably more concerned about is the impact it's going to have on road maintenance in future. So we might find the roads start to fail, or the damage to the roads is kind of happens differently. So you get kind of rutting instead of kind of potholes that you get. So we potentially a change in the way that the roads react to the type of vehicles we've got, and that could increase our maintenance costs in future.
Yeah, I just thought interested on Sonning Bridge. That's got a weight limit of 7.5 tons at the moment. Now, you might have vehicles that can quite adequately get over there at the moment, but if they convert to an electric vehicle, they might not be able to drive over that bridge and will be forced elsewhere. So kind of there's a lot more to this than meets the eye as to where vehicles might go, i.e. are they going to go into Reading or go via Henley Bridge or perhaps even Marlow to get over the Thames?
Yep, no, that's a fair comment. I think 7.5 tons would be over any kind of normal private car, but it would affect probably light goods vehicles or medium-sized goods vehicles, I imagine. But yeah, so it's definitely something we could look at further.
Yeah, believe me, there's quite a lot of these sort of light goods vehicles do actually go over it, and I'm sure some of them are actually above the limit.
Yeah.
Can I just allow Chris to jump in? He's got a comment on this, Charles.
Yeah, if I can just make a statement that the standard driving licence for a car, the car weight is maximum 3.5 thousand. Sorry, 3.5. Sorry, get it right. 3,500 kilograms. That includes a Tesla. Any car cannot be greater than that weight. So we're still at the standard of standard cars would still be under that weight limit.
I did rather carefully say electric vehicles, so that does include commercials as well. So it's just a general question. So I don't think you can just say cars.
The commercial vehicles have got a weight limit on them, and they wouldn't be able to go over there anyway. So existing commercial vehicles that are over that limit, which is 7.5 tons, wouldn't be able to go over there anyway. So it's still a no-brainer. The standard weight limits are on the vehicles; they wouldn't be allowed to go over anyway.
Okay, I think I can't help thinking the residents of Sonning will be happy if fewer cars drive over the bridge. But let's go on to Charles. Let's go on to Charles.
Thank you. A question really, there's a lot of stuff in here about improving the bus network and bus infrastructure and things like that, and improving bus ridership. Now, it's just I agree with the sentiment entirely, but it's just a question about the practicality of this. Because I know the discussions I've had with officers, basically senior highways officers, their view on the cost of bus services, how so many of them are subsidised, how ridership has fallen heavily during the pandemic, and whilst increasing is and the issue of the Winnish Park and Ride is a typical example of this, with Reading buses pulling out because they don't believe it's sustainable. So I think I just wanted to basically raise the question and flag. I know it's medium term, most of it, basically, but is this actually realistic to have this in here?
I think that's a very fair question. We don't really know, to be honest. We're currently working on a local transport plan, and we're still using evidence from kind of pre-pandemic in terms of what the bus ridership was. Because when you look at what's happened since the pandemic, we've had a change in the way people are travelling, and we're still kind of almost going back to normal. So just the vehicle levels are not quite at 100%, but they're much nearer to what they used to be. There's a lot of change still happening. So in terms of encouraging more bus ridership, it's got to be about making the bus more attractive. But until we do that, I guess we won't really know what level of ridership we'll get. But it is a major challenge to us. Let's definitely accept that.
I mean, I note and agree with your comment. I mean, I just, again, discussions I've had, the council is limited, whatever it wants to do, in what it can actually do to change the marketplace on here, because it doesn't have unlimited amounts of cash.
No.
I mean, my question again would be, if you base this off pre-pandemic figures, it doesn't feel to me that it's realistic to have this in here. It's more aspirational than deliverable, basically, in the next few years. And I don't like saying that because I believe it's the right thing to do. But I think we've got to be honest with each other about it.
Yeah, I mean, potentially that is a major problem. The only positive side of it is that the government are putting a lot of money into the bus service improvement plan programme. So the funding is coming from central government to help improve buses. So they're getting behind it. At the moment, they're still funding the £2 per ticket scheme. So they're still supporting that. So as long as those kind of actions continue, there probably still will be a future for buses. Because in theory, once you get through this difficult patch, things will start increasing and we'll have more viable services in future. But you're right, it is a challenge.
So, okay, different question, basically. I think I've answered that. I mean, I'm not meaning to be rude, but I would just question, Chair, whether this should be in here, basically, because I agree with the sentiment entirely. But I think we've got to look at things that are practical and deliverable. And I'm not sure whether we may all think this is right, but there's only a certain amount. If the council had £5 million, it could make this deliverable, but it doesn't. And I know that. So I think the other question was related to some of the cycling stuff. And one thing, I mean, I've always thought there's a big opportunity to do is if we actually had a programme of putting cycle racks into schools and encouraging more cycling to school in the right schools, this would be a real way to make a difference here. Now, I know there's lots of programmes in here about encouraging cycling, which is all good. I support that fully, basically, but I couldn't see anything specific about that. And again, I'd welcome officers' comments and trying to make a constructive and positive suggestion.
Yep, that's really helpful. Yes, so we do have an active travel officer who goes to schools and helps them develop their mode shift accreditation, which I think is on the plan somewhere. So as each school goes up a level from initially, they go from green to bronze to silver to gold, they get a grant of up to £2,000 to put towards sustainable transport infrastructure. So often the first thing that those schools will do is put in additional cycling or scooting locking facilities or storage facilities. So that's one way that we're tackling that. What we've also done is we've had some funding from DEFRA for those schools that are in air quality management areas. So we've been able to fund some shelters in those schools using DEFRA funds.
Okay, noted, but I hear that. But what can we do to actually basically encourage schools to put more cycle racks in? What can we do in a positive way to do that? There's an opportunity here, I feel, that could be in here, because these are the people in 10, 15 years' time who are going to be sitting in these places.
No, absolutely. I mean, we also do bikeability in all the schools as well, so we can train all the children. What we really need is the schools to engage with us and get on board with the mode shift process, because we've got the resources and we've got the people to support that. But if the schools, who are themselves obviously overrun with curriculum problems and various other things going on, but if you can find the right person within a school to work with us, we'll always work with them and help them develop their mode shift, get their travel plans, and encourage walking, cycling, scooting as much as possible. But yeah, getting actually into a school is much more difficult than it sounds in terms of getting an officer to talk to the right people within the school who have the power and also the time to be able to engage with us.
Ian?
Thank you. At the moment, we run cycling proficiency courses in year 6 at primary schools. And it's in the summer of the year that they're just about to leave. A lot of parents I've spoken to would actually prefer that course was done the previous year, year 5. So they can get at least a full year and a bit of cycling to school, which means that parents don't need to drive them to and fro from school. Anything we can do to encourage our team to bring that forward at the schools?
So could I just say, so my son's about to go into year 6 and he's getting offered in October, so he's going to have almost a full year. So I just want to make that point, but I'll let Rob come in.
Yep, no, that's a good point, Sarah. So basically the bikeability programme targets year 6, so it does go throughout the whole academic year. So depending on which school you're at will depend when you actually get offered the training. But I can certainly look into whether we can do year 5 either instead or as well, depending on how it works. But all of that funding comes from a grant from central government for bikeability, so I'm not 100% sure whether we're specifically told to target year 6 or whether that's what our bikeability expert kind of recommends that we do. It is obviously a good time to train the kids, because when they go up to year 7 into a different school, they've already got those skills and they're the kind of age group that are more likely to be cycling on their own to school. But I'll take that point. That's a really interesting one.
Anybody else with questions on transport? Yes.
Go to page 45, which is 27 in the document. 1A33, support for the electrification of local bus services. Only one bus route so far been selected. And as I understand, yes, it's Reading Buses as a commercial enterprise, they have to make the money. But we say on here that the fleet renewal, the funding, it would be covered by 75% central government funding, and the local authorities would need to fund the rest. Now we're looking at a bus service there that goes Lower Early, Reading University, Reading Town Centre. Wokingham doesn't get a big deal out of this. How much money is being spent by Wokingham Borough Council to support this particular electrification service?
So for that application, I don't actually know because I wasn't involved in it. But I know that it was called the Zebra Fund, which is zero emissions bus. Can't remember the rest of it. But essentially, it was a central government fund, and we were working with both Reading Buses and Reading Council. So I'm not sure how much we were offering to put in ourselves, but obviously we weren't successful. But that route was selected because it was one of the most sustainable. Because obviously the buses have a limited range, so that was kind of down as the pilot really, because it was the most suitable at the time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, anybody else? Questions on transport? Alistair?
Yes. Well, just comment on the 21 bus service is quite an important route in Lower Early, so I wouldn't. I mean, I think we probably get very good value from it. It's very frequent, runs late into the evening, and serves all the way across Lower Early. So I think it is a good service for us.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on transport? Okay, I've got a couple. So just looking at page 156 again, which is Appendix B, and it's about 2 inches up from the bottom, and it's double bus usage, and it's the first round point underneath action 1A.3.1 double bus usage, and the last clause says therefore the average kilometre per passenger per year is 0.79 kilometres. So however we've calculated this, we're saying the average journey per passenger per year is 800 metres. And I appreciate how the sum has been arrived at, but I just when I sense checked that in my head, I said, well, that sort of means there must be a whole bunch of people doing 400 metres or 500 metres. A whole bunch of people doing several kilometres, but I'm struggling to envisage that many people doing 400 or 500 metre journeys. Right. So I appreciate how it's been calculated, and obviously that saving per year will feed through into other savings. So I was wondering if perhaps that could be looked at and checked.
Yeah, it does sound very low, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's based on data. So you can just really follow up. It's,
Yeah, no, I can
it's based
see.
on the data that we've received. We can check that and see if there is more up-to-date figures. I mean, I agree. Obviously, it seems unusual, but
Yeah, I appreciate how the figure's been arrived at. I understand how the figure's been arrived at, but when I come at it from walking down the road, it doesn't feel right at all. Okay, so what's the other one? I need it written down here. Again, on page 157. So it says action 1A.4, 10% reduction from increased active transport use. And it's a second bullet point, and it says 10% of the total, 68,000, is 13,000. And even though I'm an accountant and my maths is notoriously bad, even I know that 10% of 68,000 isn't 13,000.
No, that's an interesting one. That.
So again, I don't know how it feeds through. I don't know if it's just a standalone error or if it feeds through anywhere else or if it's been fed by someone else. But perhaps officers also want to look at that.
Yes, thanks. We will.
And then what's the other thing?
It might. I'll double check it again. But yeah, it might be that it's it's 68,000 mileage. Is the mileage figure, which isn't the carbon figure, and then that's converted to carbon. So it might be that that's where it's.
Yeah, but at the moment it's a little bit unclear. Okay. And then the other thing is I couldn't help notice that the again further down the same page we're talking about state primary or secondary schools pupils who are being encouraged to cycle. So it seems to me we're not making any by state. I guess that includes academies. Do we include those as state schools? But it doesn't include the private schools. So we're looking at state school children to pick up the burden of the shift to active travel, I guess, rather than private school children.
I think. I mean, Andrew might remember. I'm not sure, but I think that's because we have better data based on the state schools. So in terms of private schools, we're not ignoring them, but I think in terms of trying to count them into those figures, it's a bit more difficult. We could potentially make some assumptions around that. Is that with you?
Yeah, I think like I say, most of the data is based on where there is like as close as possible data available. So like I say, I think it was likely the case that there was more there for the state ones. Obviously, it's just a extrapolation of the data to be as close as we can.
Okay, thank you very much. And then thinking about getting people to cycle. I mean, it's especially younger people. And there's a lot of emphasis on training young people to be safe on the roads. There doesn't seem to be much mentioned here about making the roads safer for cyclists. And it seems all of the emphasis is being put on cyclists to not get killed rather than other road users to not kill cyclists. And I think one of the examples we see of that is where, and I know Charles is familiar with this one in Montague Park, where there's a big emphasis on reducing speed limits very close to schools, but there isn't much emphasis on reducing speed limits in the much broader area, which covers the whole of the school journey. And I was just wondering, with the broader highways hat on, how much thought has been given to that? Because unless the whole journey is safe, frankly, parents aren't going to care about the last 300 metres because Johnny and Joanna aren't getting on the bikes.
Yep, that's a fair comment. I think in terms of speed limits, obviously the LC Whip has a lot of recommendations for reducing speed limits along those particular routes to encourage cycling. We do also have some of our funding set aside for local safety schemes. So every year we analyse our safety data and try and make further improvements, which include speed limit reductions, but also relatively simple changes like line markings and changes to junction geometry to try and make areas safer where we know there are safety problems. But yeah, something like a blanket 20 miles an hour within X 100 metres or miles from a school is not something we've looked at yet, but we do have a safer routes to schools budget as well. So it's something potentially that we could, if we can find there's evidence that it's putting people off, something we could look at.
And again, I was very struck by in your response when you said we would look at the data, and then you said we'd look at the safety data, and it's feeding into this sense that many parents have that unless there's an accident, it's not till someone's dead, something's going to be fixed. And we need to get past that, don't we? We need to say, look how safe our roads are. Why wouldn't you cycle? Rather
No,
than
you're
saying,
absolutely right.
well,
So, yeah, no, I agree with that. Sorry, the local safety schemes is purely based on data, but the safe routes to schools is based on our assessing those routes that children are taking to school. So working out where the majority of people are coming from, what route they might take, and then assessing that route, look at their level of service that whole route provides. So that's slightly different, and it would consider things like the perception of safety, as well as the actual kind of safety record that the local safety schemes take account of.
thank you. And will those schemes progress independently of the progress of the Lucy Whip, or will they progress in their own right?
So that's a separate budget provided by a different grant. So we have I'm trying to remember the exact figure. I think it's 150k per year for safer routes to schools. So that's, you know, it's not a massive amount, but it is enough to start hopefully making an impact and going either on a school by school basis or looking at some particular routes where we know there are issues.
Excellent. And perhaps, and as part of that, would we talk to the schools themselves? And if we are, perhaps we can ask them how many cycle routes they've got.
Yeah, we certainly can. It'll be part of what our school travel officer already does. It does mean if those schools aren't already involved in the mode shift program, they kind of miss out though. So we do have to be a bit careful. But yeah, working with schools is definitely useful because, you know, they know where their kids are travelling and they hear from the parents what's going on as well.
We've got some really good examples in the borough of schools and the mode shift stars. So we've actually, I think, one of the first platinum awards in the country. Is that right? Rob, were they the first ones, Evandens?
Yes, I think there was 8 that all got it about the same time, but basically they were the first in the country of that tranche.
Yeah. So, and we've got a lot of schools that we're engaging with and helping them develop this. So there is a lot of engagement on it.
Thank you. Right. Last call for questions on transport, Alistair and Charles. But they're just having a scratch, okay, not bidding or something. Okay, Alistair.
Yes, just going back to the thing about speed limits. I remember in 2019, Early Town Council contributed. There was supposed to be a borough-wide speed limit review, and Early Town Council made quite a detailed submission. But I can't find any trace of this on the borough website. Was there any outcome from this review? I mean, it just seems to, our submission just seems to have disappeared into a black hole, really. I mean, I can't find any evidence of it.
Yeah, I was aware of the speed limit review because it was done by the traffic management team, but I'm not aware of the outcome because I know there was a consultation and they would have done something with that data. I think they wouldn't have just stopped. But it's possible that there's a report waiting on a shelf somewhere. I'll try and chase that up and find out what's happened.
Thank you. Shahid.
Just a comment actually rather than a question before we move on. I'm just observing that obviously 10% reduction because of active transport method. That's a big assumption. We don't have the additional funding to 150 is not going to go very far to help in that process. So I'm not maybe feeling very confident that we'll achieve that 10%. So assumption is a big assumption. And I don't feel, it doesn't give me confidence that we actually will achieve that.
Yeah,
I want to be proved wrong.
That's fine. Go on.
Okay. So I was just going to say, I think Rob will explain more, but obviously that's the ambition, the way the plan is formatted. Obviously, we have to put a figure in there, and we do discuss that and things. Obviously, it is 2030, so that is obviously a way off. There is a lot we can do in that time period, and a lot of changes that we are expecting and things. So, but from my side, I don't think it's bad to include that. But obviously we continually review it to see if those things change and it can go down if that were the case.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, I haven't got much to add to that. Thanks, Angie.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, and can I just be clear? Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, officers, but my understanding of that target, that is, we've got a 50% reduction by 2030 of ICE vehicles, so internal combustion engine vehicles, and 10% of that 50% reduction comes from active travel. So I believe it would be a 5% reduction of 100%. I believe, is that right?
No, I think it is just a pure 10%.
I'm trying to remember now.
Yeah, that's okay. That is, it's so like it's the breakdown within the 50%. So like just over 30% is EV, and then an additional 10% is active, and so forth. So it is the overall 10%.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. This is the last of what I would consider to be the big ones, if you just look at the numbers at the bottom. So we are getting there. So the next, so that's all the transport questions done, I think, transport officers. When we're now back onto retrofitting, priority area 3, retrofitting domestic and commercial buildings. So are there any questions for the officers on priority area 3? Would you like to go?
Yeah, please, Sol. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just referring to page 73 about street lighting and this park night lighting, where lights to be switched off between midnight and 5:30. I'm just really wondering, because I think we all want to have the roads safe for people walking home, because I think there'll still be one or two, certainly at least at the half past hour, midnight. I'm just really wondering if the police have been consulted on that, or are they being consulted, or what sort of consultations have been made to them? Because my understanding is if the police object to that, it will not happen.
Yeah, I think that's we'd have to. There's a specific officer and team work and that aren't here in this one, so we'll have to contact them to ask about what the situation is with that, with the police and things. Yeah, I agree, it's important to do so.
Yeah, we will take that away, and we will consult the relevant officer.
Thank you. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Page 64, about passive house. These highly insulated airtight buildings, they're not going to suddenly start all putting air conditioning in, are they? Because I have heard that people saying, my house is so hot in summer, I have to put air conditioning in.
So is this...
I can answer. I could.
sorry,
is this? Are
is
you looking
page
at Gorse Ride? The
Yes,
3.1.1.
Passive house is Gorse Ride.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I come back on that one actually? Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, that the equipment that we're putting into those houses is going to need us to work with the residents and the tenants to support them on operating them correctly. So what we intend to do that is to set up an environmental group and work with the residents throughout and keep working with them, because as you say, people will start opening windows, putting air conditioning units, all sorts of things like that, which will of course render all the benefits useless for that. So we will be on top of that.
I just want to add, a passive house, it's not just about warmth, it's about cooling in the summer as well. So a true passive house will have that right balance anyway. It's about positioning for both summer and winter months, and to get maximum solar gain in the winter and cooling in the summer.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Any other questions on retrofitting?
Just a comment on the point which Michael made earlier on. I'm just thinking whether, rather than just like a safety issue is a concern, rather than having switching off the lights, why don't we have the sensors? So when somebody goes near it, the lights go on. So at least that will make it more safer rather than just switching it off. Or just wondering whether we've considered that.
Is there a question that refers to the street lighting? Again, sorry, I missed that.
Yes, it refers to street lighting and about having sensors instead of time-based dimmers.
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, that the milestone section of these tables has not been updated. It doesn't get updated every year. So that action has been there since 2020, I believe. So I believe those considerations have been taken into account, but the officer that is responsible for that particular action, is not currently attending the meeting. So what we would do is we will get in touch with him, we'll get these updates from him and propose your suggestions, check whether those have been taken into account, and then we will report back to the committee, if that's okay.
That is okay. Thank you, Sabrina. Any other questions on retrofitting? No? Okay. I'll have a very quick go. It was fascinating to see, I think, Gorse Ride included and the whole cost of the Gorse Ride project, because I think the whole cost has been listed at £125 million. And I guess there is an argument for saying, well, all that money was going to be spent anyway, except for the extra money that involved the upgrading from whatever the previous design was to passive house. So that is the development of the whole estate, isn't it? It's not just the extra environmentally friendly bits.
I'm sure Anne will come in on that, but
Yeah,
I just wanted to, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make the point, though, that climate action is something that needs to be embedded throughout everything we do. So when any project we're doing is going to have a total cost, and part of that's going to be climate, but it should be standard. So having a total cost of a project in here would make sense because it's part of the bigger picture. But yeah, I don't know if Rhiannon, Sabrina wants to say anything further on that.
Sorry, I was on mute then and I was answering away. So yeah, the project does have we haven't obviously got full eco sort of passive house standard. We've gone for sort of partial passive house standard, but we've put some really significant interventions in there, I would say, in terms of climate emergency, and it is expensive, but then it does save our residents in terms of the costs and the outlay that they have. And Sarah's quite right, it's only a proportion of the overall cost within that. So I wouldn't say that it in any way has caused any instability to the project at all. I think it's a really good development and something that we can really be proud of in Wokingham.
No, I'm not making that point. So I think I'm slightly wary of these big numbers being thrown around because, as you may recall, several years ago, the whole SEAP was trumpeted as £50 million of spending. And then, and I know it was controversial, and then suddenly we're seeing 125 million, and so I do get a little bit twitchy when I see these big numbers. But yes, it is a good thing.
Can I just say, and I understand your point, Andy, because I was also frustrated with that, and you'll have seen in the last budget that came to council that we didn't have any. We got that removed out of there. This is not about ring fencing something and saying this is what we're spending on climate. This is about what we're doing as a council as a whole and making sure this is embedded. So rather than sort of picking out and having climate as a separate thing, it's got to be through everything.
Okay, thank you. So in this section, that by far the biggest component is that 75% of homes will be EPC rated or above, and that's shown on page 32. When one looks at page 162, which is the appendix which shows the calculations, it shows how this figure is calculated. And it makes an assumption, or there's a statement that there'll be an extra 18,900 homes will get this upgrade, which is about 19,000 homes. So 19,000 homes over the next 6 years is 3,000 per year, which is, I think, 600 per week. That's not 600 per week, it's 60 per week, isn't it? And it's 3,000 per year, which seems like a lot of homes to upgrade. And I know in the task and finish groups we've looked at, do local businesses have the capacity, do they have the skilled people to carry out the volume of retrofitting which is needed? And this number of 19,000 homes over 6 years made me think of this again. So are we confident that we have the local private sector capacity to upgrade 19,000 homes in just 6 years?
I think in terms of whether we have the capacity within a sort of our business base for that sort of specialism, I'm not sure that we do. In actual fact, I think there's two issues. I think there's a skills shortage across the board and in that area, and I don't think that businesses are quite able to respond fast enough to the demand. And I've taken away the comments that you made actually at the last overview and scrutiny committee, and we will do what we can to try and stimulate training and working with businesses as well to support them, to see what we can to help support this particular sector. We'll absolutely have to work with partners to do that, and we know, for example, that the LEP, our partners at the other local authorities, and for example, Reader, are very, very keen to support that sector as well. So we will do what we can, but we don't actually have an action within this, I don't think, to really support that. And perhaps that's something that we may need to strengthen and bring in, Andy, something we could do along those lines.
And I think also I'm concerned that the carbon savings, given the 55,000, makes the assumption that we will achieve the 19,000 homes, and I'm wondering if there needs to be a sort of a risk premium in there, in that we might only do half of them because we don't have the capacity. Now, I appreciate that is going to make a big hole in what is put down as achievable in this part of the plan. But you know, one of the things I think is commendable about the plan this year compared to one or two of the earlier versions is how much better worked through it is and how much more realistic it is. So in that spirit, perhaps that number's too big, much too big.
We'll take it away and have a look at that.
That is, don't forget, that big number is the carbon savings associated if we achieve this, and the actions underneath. That we've got a variety of RAG ratings there, so some are green, some are red at the moment, and you know, things that need to be worked on and improved. So it's the assessment of where we are in achieving this is realistic, and but obviously the skill shortage is something to be highlighted. We are obviously seeing a massive increase in demand for this, as we talked earlier on, and that it's providing more certainty to industry as well, that this is the direction the market's going in as well. But yeah, we've got the first two actions on 3.4 are green. One after that is red. So we do recognise that there are things to improve there.
Are there any more comments on retrofitting domestic and commercial buildings? No? Okay, good. So let's go to area 4, which is carbon sequestration, trees, hedges. Sorry. Are there any questions on carbon sequestration? No questions on carbon sequestration. Oh dear. If you'll excuse the pun, perhaps people are wilting. Okay. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay, so let's go on to the next one then. 5, schools and young people. No questions on schools and young people. Class dismissed. Okay, questions. Priority area 6, waste and recycling. This is never a controversial area. Are there any questions or comments on waste and recycling priority? Okay, go on then, Chris.
So it's a throwaway comment into this generally is the education of children. The assumption that we are a nanny state, that we will provide bins everywhere and anywhere, so there's always somewhere to throw your rubbish. But we're not educating people to take it home. And I think we should.
I feel that is very much about the present controversy rather than the plan. So bring that back in. So let's save that for.
So if I put that to another point, it's a financial savings to the family. They're not paying, as a taxpayer, I'm not paying for it twice. I'm not paying for a service twice, I'm paying for it once.
Which page in the plan are you referring to? Okay,
It's just not in
okay,
there,
right.
but
Does anybody have any comments on the plan, please? Okay, so I do have a comment on the waste and recycling thing, and it's the target of 72%.
page.
So it is on page. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. It is on page. It's on page 33. That's the first place it appears, and it's 6.1. Achieve a 70% recycling target. And I have written down that's amazing, because currently our recycling rate, as you all know, is about 53%, which is okay. And I think the top local authorities have about 64, 65%. Personally, I think, with one of the healthiest boroughs in the country, one of the wealthiest boroughs in the country, there's no reason why we shouldn't be one of the greenest boroughs in the country in terms of our recycling. So I think it's a great target, but I am wondering if anybody has told the executive member for environment that this is his target, because I'm pretty sure I haven't seen this figure anywhere else. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be wrong.
So this target has been in the CAP, I think, since the start. It's actually in the Constitution, believe it or not, under exec responsibilities about achieving that. I'm sure I'll be corrected otherwise, but I believe one of the Welsh local authorities is the best rate, and I think it's around the sort of 68, 69%. Wales are definitely streets ahead of England in this at the moment, but this has been a target for this authority since the inception of the CAP.
Thank you. That's great to hear. I guess it's just the recent prominence of recycling targets in council activities that have drawn it to my attention. 70% does seem very, very high. It's good. It's good.
What I've asked with this CAP is that we have smart targets, but they're stretch targets as well. So we need to be really pushing ourselves, and we need to be striving to do better where we can. It's not just about recycling, it's obviously about waste reduction, and we want that percentage of recycling to be part of a lower tonnage overall of what's going through. And there's still a lot of places that we can go. So one of the things that's being trialled and about to be trialled through the RE3 partnership is the plastic, the flexible plastic packaging. At the moment, you can take it back to supermarkets. Some people do, some people don't. We're going to be trialling curbside collection of those. I separate mine out, just to give it an example, I separate mine out and take it down to the supermarket. As a family of 4, we now only put out 1 blue bag every 5 weeks. So the majority of what was in there was actually recyclable. So if that is something that works, that's going to make a massive difference. I'm just using that as one example, but there's a lot of places we can still go.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions on waste and recycling? I'll make my last point. So I'm not easily triggered, as you know, but on page 165, about 2/3 of the way down, it talks about action 6.1.2, improve residents' engagement with waste and recycling initiatives via partner Green Redeem. And we all know Green Redeem has just gone. So it might be worth doing a word search on that part of the document and getting rid of that. And anybody else got any other comments?
Yeah, we can do that. That was obviously because it was drafted at the time. Then when they were still in those discussions, so I'll update that.
Look, fair enough.
It gives you an idea of how long we've been working on this document.
Okay, then. So no more questions on waste and recycling. Let's go on to new developments. Priority area 7, new developments. Any questions on new development? So I've got Ian. Just Ian then, off you go in.
Okay, page 114 and 115. Both of these have got something against them in current status, so there's some kind of progress going on. It's quite good. But both are marked as red, or in Andy's case, it probably is green. I just wondered why.
Colour blindest.
This is actually about having policy. So this is about our own assets and going above and beyond what's required by planning. And I've requested that we actually have a proper policy in place as to how we do this and what our standards are. And we've got a kick-off meeting to look at the programme for that coming up. So this is obviously a gap that's been recognised that we need to take forward.
Thank you. And anybody else? I have a very quick one. 7.2, and again, if I've missed it, pick me up. It says designed and built to achieve BREEAM excellent standards. What does BREEAM mean? And as a general point, would it be possible to have that convention whereby acronyms are always explained by the text? I couldn't find it. If I'm wrong, yeah, sorry, but what does BREEAM mean, please?
Yeah, that's okay. I think we can add that in, and Ian can probably explain it better than me, the full definition.
Yeah, just so hello everybody. Just very quickly, BREEAM is the building research establishment method of calculating sustainability performance of a building. So it doesn't just look at carbon, but looks at a wide range of sort of environmental impacts, including things such as water usage, accessibility to services and facilities, etc. It's an assessment methodology which gets updated over time as well. So as sort of technology and capability improves, that standard is automatically shunted along to improve over that time period. Very happy to work with Sabrina and Andrew to put in a little explanation into the text or a bullet point just to explain how that works.
Thank you. Thank you. Charles?
Yeah, I mean, I had a point on this. Agree with a lot of it's in here, what's in here. There's a point about development, though, which is about reducing the need to travel. Now, I basically have no wish to get into what's a fairly controversial political subject, but just taking the reality today on the ground. If you look at Arborfield, the village centre, the way it's been built, we've got a large housing estate there without, well, I think there's one co-op for nearly 1,000 houses. And if you want to buy anything down there, you can't. So people have to travel. Now, there's a lot of reasons why that happened, which there's no need to go into here. But perhaps we need something in this which actually says facilities have to be built. You know, developers have to be legally enforced to actually provide their obligations under all circumstances, because otherwise we could end up with exactly the same situation all over again.
Would you like a quick comment?
Thank you, Ian. Yes.
Yeah. Charles raises a very important issue and a complexity of delivering new development, and one which I think frustrates councillors, officers and residents alike in terms of the timing of delivery of infrastructure to support services and facilities. Certainly, my best professional advice will be to try and achieve development which limits the need to travel for unnecessary journeys. There will always be necessary journeys, of course. And that is about trying to create a community which has access to local services and facilities without the need to travel, or if travel is necessary, an option being active travel in the first instance, utilising attractive routes, working with Rob Curtis, for example. The issues of delivery of shops is complex, and it's effectively a commercial operator will only be interested in running a shop when a population is there to use the shop. So there's an economic argument as well as a social argument. We as officers are very mindful of that, and we certainly wish to use as much leverage as we can to ensure those types of infrastructure are in as early as possible. I doubt it will be something that we will be able to resolve entirely, but we are considering whether there are ways for us to sort of work with the promoting landowner to put in place sort of stepped facilities, so that some facilities can go in earlier and then they increase over time, for example. But there is a complexity in simply that a shop will not be economic till a certain population exists, and we won't be able to square that circle entirely. But certainly officers are aware and are looking to be as inventive as possible try and ensure that infrastructure in as early as possible, so we can prevent as many journeys as necessary. But in the early years of a major development, it will always be a complexity and a problem.
Yeah, accepted. And yeah, Ian, you're obviously stating common sense and fact there. I think what I was going to say is one final point on this. Speaking of two I know, which are Arborfield and Montague Park, the centre at Montague Park is a lot smaller, and therefore basically commercially it's, I would imagine, a lot easier to get people who would take those spaces, where what's proposed at Arborfield is obviously a big development, which is then by its nature more complex and more difficult to deliver. So, I mean, that's others have got things to say on this. That's my final point on that.
Ian,
sorry. What Ian has said is right. The developer can build the building, but it doesn't mean to say you're going to have a supermarket there, because the retailer's got to be able to come in. But in the case of Arborfield, there was a smaller shop that was supposed to be built over by the horses, and somehow that one hasn't been built. So you're right, they could have done a stepped approach, and it's not been done.
Chair, I just want to, on the similar point, I just want to share that something which came up in the Health Scrutiny Committee as well, that Arborfield was mentioned, particularly the pharmacies issue came up. So there is the regulation that pharmacy should be within a 1 mile. But again, pharmacies are regarded as an essential need as well for the community. And for that same reason, people will be having to travel very far, more than a mile, and there is no even plan to have a pharmacy within a mile of Arborfield where it's being built. So again, we are developing, but obviously we're not thinking holistically of other services which are essential for the community. But obviously that means we're not actually helping the plan which we're looking at.
Thank you, Shahid. And I guess with a lot of the developments already done, for better or for worse, we've got one more chance to get it right with the south of the railway development. And I'd just like to sort of go back to something Charles said, I think a meeting or two ago, where one thing which would help in the new settlements is somehow writing in the early provision of broadband services or ways with which broadband services can be connected early on, so people can work from home very, very early on.
It's not just the south Wokingham, we've obviously got the whole new local plan, and 7.3 in the CAP is about the spatial strategy, which is basically this point you're raising.
Okay, are there any more questions on new developments? No? Okay. Priority area number 8, procurement. Are there any questions or comments on procurement? I've got Ian.
Oh, sorry. Let's try that again. Page 121, it talks about by 2024. Does that mean 31st of December 2023 that it's done, or is it sometime within 2024? And if it is the latter, is that calendar year, financial year, municipal year? When in 2024? Could we have a little bit of clarification, please?
Sorry, did you go?
Do you want me to?
Go ahead, yeah.
So the CAP does cover the solar year, so it will be from January to December 2024. There isn't a specific month, so we will be within those 12 months.
So I need more clarification on that then. So it's within the year of 2024, not by
It's within
Not by
the year.
the 31st
Not
December
by the
2023.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Because yes, that can be by that date can mean by the end of the previous year.
So we can be more specific and say by the end of the year 2024, if that
Okay,
helps.
I'll do it.
Within the year 2024, we can
I'll do it.
we can address that. That's fine.
Alistair.
Thanks. Yeah, just a quick question on page 120. It talks about the new government procurement bill. Does this put any particular constraints on local authorities, how they procure?
Good evening. So if I can come in on that one. Yes, there will be a range of new requirements that are given to us that set out some of the tools in which we can achieve this agenda. So I think to begin with, we've already got a revised selection questionnaire that we will use. But again, we are waiting for the final bill to pass through to give us the final details. So we'll be able to report back on that when it's passed through legislation.
Thank you, Rob. Any other questions? Okay, no, that's procurement. Priority area 9, engagement and behaviour change. Any questions on priority area 9? No, no questions on that. Okay, any questions on the last priority area, which is council specific actions? Any questions on council specific actions? Sorry, Chris.
So if I look at page 130 and 10.1.2, promote home working and remote working practices amongst council staff, where we have a government telling civil servants turn up at the office. Is WBC dictated to in any way by the government as to working practices for staff?
I'm not aware that we are dictated to at all by government on our working practices. I think we make our own policy in terms of that, but very happy to take that away and speak to our HR department and come back with a written answer for you in terms of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions on council specific actions? Shahid?
I'll just get a general comment on that. I mean, one thing earlier on it was picked up was the lack of skills in this area. And is that something council specific can do, work very closely with partners to develop that skills in this area? So, I mean, talk about 19,000 houses, how we're going to deliver that. So I'm just raising this as a general issue here. Could we work as a council actively and to develop those skills, which definitely will be required in the next few years?
Thank you. I think that's probably Rhiannon.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things we can do. I think we have to be reasonably creative. I think one of the ways that we can do it is work with our suppliers. So through procurement, we can look to try and work with our suppliers to see if they're prepared to develop skills where appropriate within their own area, but also we're looking at maintenance contracts, for example, or all of those sort of areas. But also we work quite closely with developers as well. So as part of the planning process, we ask developers to create an employment skills plan. We could weight that a little bit more towards sort of the climate skills that you need in construction, for example. So that's just two examples of thinking differently. So absolutely, and I mentioned earlier that we're working with our partners in neighbouring local authorities, with the LEP, with the university, with the colleges, So it's certainly something we can do along those lines. And obviously we're talking directly to businesses themselves. So it has to be a partnership approach, and we do have some leverage ourselves, I think, on what we can do.
Thank you.
That's really good to hear that we are working with the departments here. But my observation is that we take this, our approach is very isolated. It's very solo. We work with business, but what we need to think is a holistic program. So where young people, which we can be offered to, for example, young people who doesn't want to go to university, perhaps. So it's a realistic, coming up with something, council working with businesses and LEP, and then offering to young people working with schools and colleges, look, here is a realistic option. Those who may not consider going to university, and there are lots of them who are not, considering going to university because of the financial issues as well. So I'm just thinking that perhaps what we need to come out with a holistic, approach rather than just an isolated, discussion with the business and LEP, and that is it. But it doesn't, it's not communicating across the board.
Yeah, it's certainly sort of work that we, need to do, sort of talking to schools and talking about the opportunities that they've got. We work with Activate Learning that does the further education, runs all the further education colleges across Berkshire. And I know we've talked before that some of the best training is over in Newbury and not locally, but we perhaps need to make sure that that's shared out a little better by talking to those providers. And there's a very, very good university training college as well in Reading that specialises on technology skills early on. But yeah, it is about perhaps having that holistic view, and we'll take that on board.
Thank you, Rhian. Shahid, anybody else? On council specific actions, Chris?
It's just a comment and a question really about page 133. Current status. So you're currently working on 30 properties to improve the carbon neutral standards. Are all of these properties occupied by council staff, or are some of these properties leased to businesses? Are we doing the work for ourselves, or are we doing the work for others?
I don't know, is Ian still here?
Yeah.
Ian Goff, I think that's one for.
Yeah, that would be one for Ian.
Yes, so it's across the estate, to be honest with you. And they will be in various different states. What I mean by that is some will be empty, some will be tenanted. So it's across the board, to be honest with you. I know that doesn't answer things succinctly, but I'm trying to give the best answer I can.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this part, on this priority? Okay, I have a couple. So on page 133, and I guess this is very similar to things which have happened in other parts of the plan, where I'm looking at the comment and I'm thinking this is obviously an historical milestone outcome. And I'm looking at outcome number 6, which is a feasibility assessment on Woodley Library as a pilot project. Now, I'm pretty sure, judging by the planning applications, I see that's all been done. So would it be possible? I appreciate that officers may want to keep the history in the plan, but is it possible to indicate with a completed brackets, just something so that we can see what stuff hasn't been done? And again, further up, number 2, 3-year assessment, average kilowatt value to 20. That I'm sure has been done. So that's a general thing. A much more specific thing, if you'll indulge me, is I was just thinking about the council's fleet and this issue of a grey fleet. Now, I don't know how many council officers drive into the office with using an internal combustion engine and then have to disappear somewhere off around the borough to do something else. And I am wondering, is there any scope for a sort of a couple of fleet vehicles which are used by council staff, which have internal combustion engines, but they use them for work trips within the borough? And I'm thinking I often get officers coming to do things in my ward and they're driving their normal cars. they're not driving an electric vehicle. And I then thought that perhaps you could have perhaps a local provider of electric vehicles would sponsor this vehicle for you. So you've got a demonstration of technology, you've got sponsorship, and you've got partnership working. Just a little thought. And I hate doing the micromanaging stuff, but just a thought.
No, you're talking about a car share scheme for council staff.
It's not a car. It's sort of a car share scheme
that they can use to do.
Yeah, and then maybe they can even take it home, and then so a couple of journeys a week are in the electric vehicle belongs to council, but they have to leave their regular car here, so they're not getting a freebie car. They're just doing an exchange.
Or they can cycle here if they're local.
Well, they get. I'm talking about officers who live further afield.
Yes. No, and I think the point is we know that the plan as it stands won't achieve our aims. So we welcome further opportunities to close that gap. So yeah, I'm not sure if anything is being looked at in that area at all. But if it's not, I think it's one that we can certainly look at. Rob's put his hand up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you go
Yes.
first, Rob. Go on.
Yeah, so 10.1.1 is about car clubs on page 112. And part of that has been just what you were just saying. So we're aiming to do another staff survey within the next month, hopefully. Pre-pandemic, we surveyed our employees and just asked them why they drove into the office effectively. So some were driving in because they needed their car for work, and they would have got the train in if there was a car at the office. So at that stage, there was quite a good case for a car club for staff, so pool cars effectively, that could also be used by the public out of hours. So those people living around the Wokingham town area near Shoot End would benefit from a car club in the evening as well. What we're not sure is the number of people actually coming into the office. We know that's reduced significantly. At the moment, we've got staff parking in the Shoot End car park and in Carnival pool car park as well. So whether that's still going to continue and whether that's going to impact on the way that people travel in and how often they come into the office, they're all those things that we're trying to ask at this stage to see if there is still a feasible scheme there or not.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. From my side, to follow up I think that covered the car club side of things, but the staff travel survey might also feed into some other reports we're looking at in terms of the grey mileage. You talked about the commuting and things as well. So we have had reports from EST, the Energy Savings Trust, about that kind of the data behind it, and we're exploring options for replacing our fleet vehicles with EV. I think that's one of these specific actions further down. So we're exploring that at the moment because yes, we agree we want to do that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions on this last priority area? No? Good. So I think that is it from members. I would just like to say thank you very much again to the officers for all the work that's gone into the plan. It does feel to me like the best version of the plan that we've seen so far. And I once again appreciate the extra effort you guys put in to get it to us in advance of when we would normally get it. That really was appreciated. Thank you.
Could I also just
Question, sir.
So I just wanted to say thank you to the committee as well for some really constructive feedback, comments, questions. This is a shared responsibility. And if you feel that there are any other ideas or anything at all that you think that can help us close the gap, we welcome any feedback and suggestions. But I want to thank you for the constructive discussion tonight. And thank you obviously to officers as well who've been absolutely brilliant. Thanks.
So we have one more agenda item, I am afraid, before the rest of you can go, and that is to consider the work programme for the next few meetings. So what the committee has decided was that we would look at the most up-to-date version of the emergency action plan, and off the basis of looking at the emergency action plan, we would decide which parts of the plan or which issues related to the plan we would look at in future meetings. So does anybody have any suggestions or requests or any comments? Go on then, Charles.
Chair, a suggestion. Obviously, the local plan is going to be something that's had big relevance in this. I know it's not ready yet, but when it does start to appear and be formed, I think you're seeing as delivering this relies heavily on that. I think we should look at it.
I've got, didn't we not look at the local plan very recently in the last meeting? We have just looked at the local plan. Okay. I appreciate one of the problems with having so many people who aren't normally here. They won't perhaps appreciate that.
Minutes.
It's page 7 of the minutes. I've been reliably informed. Shahid.
Just a comment here, Chairman. Obviously, this what we discussed tonight, and obviously the agenda covers everything which the council does, more or less. Everything is covered in here, almost, right? But I'm just thinking that being some of the other committees as well, that there needs to be sometime a feel that, you know, is it interconnected across all the other scrutinies we do as well? I know it needs to be separate, but the things which goes on in the committee has impact on this directly. So I'm just thinking, how do we make sure that everything is all interconnected, linked, and is joined up approach?
I think what we try to do is to make sure that in this committee we stay focused on the climate emergency impacts. So you're right, there's public transport, there's road, there's all sorts of other stuff, but we're very much focused on climate emergency impacts, not the other stuff.
What I'm saying is what happens in that space impact us here. Yes.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that. Do we have any other suggestions for items on the plan that we want to look at over the next few months? Are members feeling a little bit frazzled and they need to go home and have a think about it, and then we can perhaps do something over email? Yeah, but we're still being recorded for the public. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, sorry. Would be to plan for the future for an update on how the solar farms are going. I'm not saying let's have it for the next meeting within a month or something, because things have got to develop. But to say pull it forward in 3 months and say how's it been getting on.
I think that's a very good idea. I think we almost want it as almost as a standing item, because it has all gone pear-shaped. I think we should have that as a standing item, if other members are agreed. Okay. Are there any other items? Okay, so I'm going to go back to Plan A, which was you're very frazzled. So why don't we? And also I appreciate a lot of people are thinking I'm never going to have to come back here again. So it is whoever I'm subbing for's problem. So what we'll do, if members are agreed, we will let an email conversation of the permanent members of the committee take place to look at what we're going to do next. Okay, and it's. We will perhaps circulate a summary of what we've done already, just to remind people. Okay, so unless anyone's got anything they want to raise. Okay then, thank you all very much.